On a cold winter morning, New York was draped in an icy cloak, turning bustling streets into treacherous paths. The biting wind forced people to bundle up, hurrying to their destinations. The city's central hospital, a monument of brick and glass, buzzed with activity even at daybreak. Amongst illuminated corridors and crowded waiting rooms, Dr. James Mitchell was already immersed in his exhausting routine. Known for his tireless dedication, James was a beacon of hope for many patients, yet carried the weight of tough decisions with every shift. As he made his rounds, an urgent call blared through the speakers, momentarily interrupting the hospital's constant hum. Pedestrian hit on 5th Avenue, patient en route. James's heart raced upon hearing the news. He knew every second counted in such cases. He hurried to the emergency room, mentally preparing for what lay ahead. The ambulance arrived with a jolt, its rear doors swinging open as paramedics rushed out, carrying a stretcher. On it lay a visibly injured homeless man, struggling to breathe. His belongings were scant and scattered, with no identification to be found. His face, pale and streaked with a mix of blood and dirt, was a sight that tugged at everyone's heartstrings. The bystanders who had aided him on the street looked visibly shaken. A woman, tears in her eyes, approached James. He was just trying to cross the street. Please, doctor, save him. James, with his usual calmness, reassured her. We'll do everything we can. He's in good hands now. Inside the emergency room, chaos reigned. Nurses and doctors moved swiftly, preparing the patient for initial exams. James watched intently, taking in every detail. The man's critical condition demanded immediate action. He noted exposed fractures and suspected severe internal injuries. He needs a CT scan now, James instructed, turning to the trauma team leader. Time seemed to accelerate, each decision needing to be precise. We have no ID. We don't know who he is, a nurse said, her voice trembling slightly. That doesn't matter right now, James replied firmly. Our job is to save him. Let's focus on that. The patient was rushed to the CT room. James kept close watch, studying monitors and assessing the situation with a trained eye. Prepare the ore, he said, not taking his eyes off the screens. We have multiple fractures and possible internal bleeding. We need to move fast. As they prepared for surgery, James reflected on the situation. The hospital was laden with bureaucracy and rules, often putting patients' lives second. He knew he would need to justify every step he was about to take, but his commitment to human life always outweighed any protocol. The team was ready, and the unknown man was transferred to the operating room. James donned gloves and mask, feeling the weight of responsibility grow heavier. He knew the journey ahead would be long and challenging, but he was determined to save that life, whatever the outcome. We're ready, doctor, a nurse said, her eyes reflecting both fear and hope. James nodded, took a deep breath, and began. Let's begin. Inside the hospital, tension mounted with each passing second. As the medical team prepared for surgery, hospital administrator Susan hurried into the preparation room. She appeared visibly concerned, her face reflecting the gravity of the situation. Susan spoke firmly, addressing Dr. Mitchell. We need to await authorization before any invasive procedures. We don't have sufficient information on this patient. James, eyes fixed on the monitor, replied, Susan, he's in critical condition. We can't wait. Every second counts. Arms crossed, Susan countered, you know the protocols. We need more information before proceeding. James, frustration evident in his tone, retorted, protocols won't save him. My priority is his life, not bureaucracy. James's internal conflict was palpable. He understood the importance of following rules, but at that moment, the patient's life was at stake. He recalled his motivation for becoming a doctor: to save lives, no matter the cost. With a decisive resolve, James turned to his team and declared, let's proceed. Prepare everything for surgery. We can't wait. Confident in James's leadership, the team began to move swiftly. The preparation for surgery was intense, with every detail carefully observed. James donned his surgical gloves, feeling the weight of responsibility in his hands. The room was charged with a mix of fear and hope, and the steady beeps of the cardiac monitors set the urgent rhythm. As he prepared, James's mind raced. He knew he was risking his career, but his conscience wouldn't allow him to do anything else. I'm a doctor. I can't let him die, he murmured to himself. Inside the operating room, tension hung thick in the air. The team was focused, and with steady hands, James began the procedure. Every cut, every move, was crucial. The patient teetered on the brink of death, and any mistake could be fatal. The bright lights of the surgical suite reflected off the sweat on James's brow as he concentrated intensely on the task at hand. The surgery was complex, challenges arising at every turn. James dealt with exposed fractures, internal bleeding, and the constant threat of losing the patient on the table. The team followed his instructions precisely, trusting in his leadership. "We're losing blood pressure," Be alerted one of the nurses, her voice tinged with tension. James, calm yet urgent, responded, "You increase the fluids. We need to stabilize him now." The atmosphere was charged. Sweat dripped beneath James's mask, but his mind remained wholly focused on the task. Every move was meticulously calculated. The constant beep of the heart monitor was a relentless reminder of the fragile line between life and death. Finally, after hours of strenuous effort, the situation began to stabilize. The patient was out of immediate danger, but the road to recovery would be long. James removed his gloves and looked at the team, exhausted yet relieved. Well done, everyone. He's stable." The surgery was a success, but the battle was far from over. As the patient was taken to the recovery room, a collective sigh of relief escaped the medical team. The air felt lighter, yet exhaustion was written on everyone's faces. Nurse Jane, with a tired smile, said, "Well done, doctor. I don't know how you managed." James, still breathing heavily, replied, "It was a team effort. Everyone did their part." He removed his surgical gloves with a firm gesture, but the weight of responsibility still hung heavy on his shoulders. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, giving way to exhaustion. Dr. Stevens, a fellow surgeon, approached and placed a hand on James's shoulder. "You really took a risk there, James. I'm not sure I would have had the same courage." James gave a slight smile, but inside, his thoughts were turbulent. Did I do the right thing? What if something had gone wrong? He looked at the patient, now stable but unconscious. That man's life had hung by a thread, and he knew he had made the only choice possible. As the team cleaned up the operating room, James walked to the sink to wash his hands, the sound of running water helping to calm his mind. He found himself reflecting on what had brought him here. Countless sleepless nights during residency, moments where someone's life had depended on his hands. The scent of disinfectant was strong but familiar, bringing a strange comfort amidst the chaos. Suddenly, Susan's voice, the hospital administrator, snapped him back to reality. "Dr. Mitchell, I need to speak with you in my office." James nodded, feeling a knot form in his stomach. He knew this conversation was inevitable. With one last look at the patient, he followed Susan down the silent corridors. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the quiet hallway, contrasting with the turmoil he felt inside. Entering Susan's office, the atmosphere was tense. Susan, visibly concerned, began to speak. James, what you did was risky. We know rules exist for a reason." "I understand, Susan," James replied, his voice firm. But there was no time to follow protocol. He would have died." Susan sighed, arms crossed. "I understand your position, but we need to prepare a defense for the disciplinary hearing. This could be big." James nodded, feeling the weight of his actions once again. "I'm ready to face the consequences. I did what was necessary." The next day, the hospital administration decided to suspend Dr. Mitchell from his duties until the disciplinary board could judge the case. James received the formal notification of suspension at home, trying to process everything that had happened. The phone wouldn't stop ringing, colleagues calling to express their support or concern. With each ring, the sense of isolation grew. He discussed the case with some colleagues and mentors. Dr. Stevens, with a serious expression, said, James, you need to be prepared for the worst. They could suspend your license. I know, James replied, trying to keep his voice steady. But I couldn't let that man die. I did what I thought was right. We need to build a solid defense, Susan added, who was also present. Let's focus on the fact that you saved a life. The emotional preparation for the trial was draining. James tried to focus on work, but the impending hearing was always on his mind. He mentally reviewed every detail of the surgery, preparing to answer all the questions that would arise. Then, the inevitable happened. The media caught wind of the story and turned it into a national scandal. Sensational headlines blared across newspapers. A doctor defies rules and risks career to save homeless man. TV cameras soon appeared at the hospital's doorstep, capturing every detail of the unfolding drama. James tried to stay composed as he was bombarded with questions upon entering the hospital. "Dr. Mitchell, do you regret your decision?" shouted one reporter. "How do you justify disobeying direct orders?" insisted another. He sought refuge in work, trying to find solace in routine, but the pressure was relentless. Every co-worker, every patient, seemed to have an opinion about what he had done. Some silently supported him, while others whispered criticisms and doubts about his decision. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. James entered the room where the hospital board was gathered. The atmosphere was tense. Susan was there, along with other administrators and members of the medical staff. All eyes were on him. Dr. Mitchell, you defied a direct order and put your career at risk. How do you justify your actions?" asked the board president, their voice firm and probing. James took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words before speaking. "I saw a man who needed immediate help. There was no time for bureaucracy. My priority is saving lives. If that means risking my career, then so be it. But I couldn't stand by and watch him die." The board members murmured among themselves, evaluating every word James spoke. He could feel their gaze, heavy with judgment. The wait for their decision seemed endless. The room was so silent he could hear the sound of his own heart beating. Meanwhile, outside the boardroom, the hospital continued its frenzied pace. Life didn't stop, even as James's hung in the balance. He wondered about the patient he had saved. Was he conscious? Was he recovering well? These questions burned in his mind, but he had to focus on the present moment. Finally, the board president stood up. "Dr. Mitchell, we understand the gravity of the situation you found yourself in. However, protocols exist for a reason. We are divided on the appropriate action, but one thing is clear. The life you saved is proof of your skill and dedication." James felt a mix of relief and tension. The judgment was still not entirely clear, but there was an opening for hope. The real battle for his career and reputation was just beginning, and he knew every future step would be crucial. When the medical team realized the man was about to wake up, tension in the hospital intensified. Nurses and doctors around the bed watched as vital signs stabilized and the patient's eyes began to move. Aware of the delicate situation, one nurse discreetly decided to call James. Despite being suspended, James chose to sneak into the hospital to see how the man was doing. Careful not to be noticed, James entered the hospital and made his way to the room where the patient lay. Soft morning light filled the room as James positioned himself beside the bed, anxious to see the man open his eyes. The patient slowly opened his eyes, confused, trying to orient himself. His eyes met James's, who approached with a warm smile. "Good morning," James said gently. "You're in the hospital. You had an accident, but you're in good hands now." The man tried to speak, but his voice came out as a hoarse whisper. Where am I?" "You're at New York Central Hospital," James replied. "You were hit by a car, but you're recovering well." The patient frowned, trying to remember something. I don't remember anything. Who am I?" James felt a chill. The lack of identification and now amnesia made the situation even more mysterious. "We don't know yet. You didn't have any ID when you were brought in." Days passed, and as the patient regained strength, fragments of memory began to surface. James was by his side when the man, with a distant look, murmured, "John, my name is John Harris." James was shocked. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't immediately connect the person to the name. John Harris? He repeated, trying to recall where he had heard that name before. Yes, the patient said, his voice gaining strength each day. John Harris. Hi. I'm a reclusive billionaire. I disappeared years ago. The revelation struck like lightning. James felt his heart race. John Harris, the billionaire who had mysteriously vanished years ago, lay in the hospital bed. The pieces were starting to fit together. He remembered the headlines, the conspiracy theories, how the world had wondered where John Harris had gone. I lived on the streets, running away from everything and everyone, Harris continued. I wanted to disappear, but now, it seems life had other plans for me. James couldn't believe what he was hearing. Are you really John Harris? The John Harris? He asked, still incredulous. Yes, Harris replied, with a heavy sigh. And you saved my life. John Harris's story quickly spread through the hospital, causing a stir. Journalists, who were already attentive to James's case, now had a new reason to gather at the entrance. James knew the situation was about to become even more complicated. Determined to protect Harris's privacy, James spoke with the staff about the need to keep the secret. We need to ensure he has a safe environment to recover, as he said firmly. I don't want the media turning this into a circus. Meanwhile, Harris and James spent more time together, sharing stories and forming an unexpected friendship. Harris told James about his life before he disappeared, about the pressures and isolation that led him to leave everything behind. I thought I was doing the right thing, Harris said, looking at the ceiling of the room. But now I see how much it cost me. Thank you for giving me a second chance. James smiled, feeling a deep respect for the man who had lived so much and suffered more than he could imagine. You deserve this second chance, John. Everyone does. The situation was changing rapidly, and James knew they would need to proceed with caution. Harris's identity revelation was a new chapter, full of uncertainties, but also of hope. Together, they were ready to face whatever came next, one step at a time. One day, as they talked, Harris asked, James, how do you deal with all this pressure? All this judgment? James thought for a moment before responding. I think the only thing that keeps me going are moments like this, when I know I've made a difference. When I've saved a life. That makes it all worth it. Harris nodded, understanding deeply. You've done more than save my life. You've given me a new perspective. Maybe I can do something significant with this second chance. James looked at Harris, sensing the sincerity in his words. I'm sure you will, John. I'm sure you will. In the hospital, the buzz was constant. John Harris, now fully conscious and determined, was about to do something no one expected. He had decided to hold a press conference to reveal his true identity and tell his story. The hospital administration, concerned about the repercussions, tried to dissuade him. In the boardroom, Harris sat facing the board. The tension was palpable. Susan, the hospital administrator, was visibly nervous. Trying to stay calm, Susan said, Mr. Harris, we understand your position, but we believe a press conference now may not be the best idea. The hospital's image is already under scrutiny, and such exposure could further complicate things. Harris, with a firm expression, replied, Before, as a simple homeless man, I was a burden to you. You wanted me out of here as soon as possible. Now that you know about my fortune, you want to treat me like a treasure? Nothing is more important than a life, and that's what I'll say at the press conference. The hospital president, attempting a conciliatory tone, intervened. Mr. Harris, we value your opinion and are committed to transparency, but we need to consider the consequences for everyone involved. Please reconsider. Unyielding, Harris stood up and said, My decision is made. The press conference will happen, and I will tell the world what truly matters here. The press room was packed. Journalists from around the world eagerly awaited. Harris entered, accompanied by a medical team and James, who stood by his side as a show of support. Camera flashes were incessant, and the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Harris took his place at the podium and began to speak, his voice clear and firm. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Harris. Some of you know me as a reclusive billionaire who disappeared years ago. What many don't know is that I spent those years on the streets, living as a homeless person. It was a choice I made to escape the pressures of the life I led, but it led me down a path of hardships I never imagined. The room fell silent, absorbing every word. Harris continued, Recently, I was hit by a car and brought to this hospital. At that moment, I was just another nameless homeless person, a burden to the system. But Dr. James Mitchell and his team didn't see me that way. They saw a life that needed saving, and they acted swiftly, despite policies and bureaucracies that could have hindered my treatment. He paused, looking directly into the cameras. I want to publicly thank Dr. Mitchell. He put my life above any hospital's market interests. If it weren't for him and his courage, I wouldn't be here today. He's a true hero. Emotion filled the room. James, standing beside Harris, felt a lump in his throat. Harris continued, I also want to talk about the importance of seeing beyond appearances and valuing every human life. Before, as a simple homeless man, I was a burden. Now, that you know about my fortune, you want to treat me like a treasure. This needs to change. Every life is precious, regardless of status or wealth. Journalists began asking questions, but Harris remained focused on his message. Media reactions were instantaneous and emotional. Articles praising Harris and Dr. Mitchell began to appear, highlighting the importance of prioritizing human life above all other considerations. Pressure on the hospital administration increased. Internally, heated discussions took place. Susan and the board were divided on whether to maintain James's suspension or reassess his situation. In a meeting with the team, Susan said, We need to consider the positive impact Dr. Mitchell's decision had. The community is on our side, and we need to respond to that. The hospital president, though still concerned about the image, agreed, Let's reassess Dr. Mitchell's situation. We need to act quickly to correct any mistakes. But for now, he remains suspended until we have a final decision. Meanwhile, James tried to stay calm. He knew Harris's support and public pressure could make a difference, but the future was still uncertain. The only thing clear was that truth and courage had prevailed, and now he and Harris were ready to face whatever came next, one step at a time. The weeks that followed were intense and filled with uncertainty. The hospital was under scrutiny, the media covered every development, and the hospital administration was divided on what to do with Dr. Mitchell. Finally, the board convened to make a definitive decision. On the morning of the decision, James sat in his apartment, staring at the phone. He knew his career was at stake. When the phone finally rang, he answered with trembling hands. Susan, on the other end of the line, said, James, the board has made a decision. You are cleared to return to work. Your license will be upheld. James felt a wave of relief and emotion. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the feeling of gratitude wash over him. Thank you, Susan. This means so much to me. Susan continued, We're all here at the hospital, waiting to see you. Come over soon. When James arrived at the hospital, he was greeted with applause and hugs from his colleagues. The atmosphere was electrifying, with smiles and tears of relief. Nurse Jane, tears in her eyes, said, We knew you'd come back. You deserve this. Dr. Stevens, smiling, added, Welcome back, James. The team wouldn't be the same without you. James, visibly moved, replied, Thank you, everyone. I couldn't have gotten through this without your support. He felt the weight of stress and uncertainty finally dissipating, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. A few days later, John Harris asked to meet with James. They met in a quiet conference room at the hospital. The room was bathed in the soft afternoon light, creating a warm and intimate atmosphere. Harris, with a serious look, began, James, I want to thank you again for everything you've done for me. I've thought a lot about how I can repay you. I'd like you to lead a new medical foundation I'm establishing. It will focus on serving people who lack access to quality medical care, like I did when I was on the streets. James was surprised and touched by the offer. John, it's an incredible offer. I never thought of something like this. Harris continued, You have the heart and passion needed to lead this. There's no one more suitable." James spent the next few days deeply reflecting on Harris's offer. He thought about the challenges he had faced, the sacrifices he had made, and the impact he had always wanted to have on people's lives. It was an opportunity to make a difference on an even larger scale. He pondered the responsibilities and the new possibilities this role would bring. He thought about the sleepless nights during residency, the moments of despair, and the lives he had saved. Now, he could expand that impact. He finally decided to accept the offer. The next day, he met with Harris again to give his response. John, I've accepted your offer. I'm ready to lead the foundation and bring medical care to those in need." Harris smiled, visibly relieved. Thank you, James. We'll do great things together." The following weeks were filled with preparations. James tearfully said goodbye to his colleagues at the hospital, but with the promise that they would stay in touch and collaborate. He was ready for a new phase in his career, one filled with challenges but also immense possibilities. In his final message to the hospital, James said, "This is not a goodbye, but a new beginning. I am deeply grateful for everything I've experienced here and for each one of you. Our work together does not end here. We will continue to fight for life and human dignity wherever we are." Harris, beside James, added, "We are starting something that can change lives. And we do this with the commitment that every life matters, every person deserves to be cared for with respect and compassion." From a tumultuous beginning, a powerful partnership was born, dedicated to doing good and transforming lives. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more emotional and inspiring stories. Turn on notifications to receive updates on new videos. Thank you for watching, and until next time.